We already told you about the Chinese nuclear submarine that sank at the pier before it ever saw combat. But sinking is not the only way Beijing destroys its own fleet. Sometimes they prefer to burn them. Meet the Type 075 amphibious assault ship. This 40,000-ton monster is the flagship of the People's Liberation Army Marine Corps. It was built to carry Type 726 Yi hovercraft, tanks, and 30 attack helicopters to storm the beaches of Taiwan. They called it the future of the Chinese Navy. China built an invasion ship, but one fire burned it before it even left port. On April 11, 2020, while the very first Type 075, later named the CNS Hainan Hull 31, was still tied to the dock in Shanghai, a simple construction spark turned the pride of the fleet into a towering chimney of toxic black smoke. While American ships use strict material condition zebra protocols to seal compartments and survive hits, the Hainan was built so fast that it lacked the most basic survival feature of all: damage control. How did a navy obsessed with wolf warrior strength build a warship that can be taken out by a welding torch? The Hainan isn't just big, she's a floating airfield and a mechanized parking garage rolled into one, designed to move an army straight onto a hostile shore. 40,000 tons, 230 meters from bow to stern, and a flight deck wide enough to launch a full squadron at a time. The hull number is 31, but in Beijing's eyes, she's number 1, a purpose-built flagship for the People's Liberation Army Marine Corps, meant to lead the charge if China ever decides to cross the strait to Taiwan. Inside her belly, the well deck is built to swallow 2 or 3 Type 726 hovercraft. Each one can bring a tank or an armored company straight onto a beach, no pier required. Above, the hangar stretches the length of a city block, tall enough to fit 30 helicopters, Z-8 troop carriers, Z-10 gunships, whatever the mission calls for. 7 landing spots on the flight deck mean you can launch a full air assault in minutes. Down below, there's room for a mechanized infantry company, tanks, artillery, and a couple and hundred Marines itching to hit sand. On paper, she's bristling with firepower. HHQ: 10 missiles to swat down incoming threats, HPJ-11, Gatling guns to chew up anything that gets close. The plan is simple: get in fast, unload hard, and let the Marines push inland before the enemy can react. In the war rooms, this is the ship that makes the Taiwan scenario possible. But none of it matters if your invasion bus can't survive its own ride to the front. A ship that can't set zebra at the dock is a coffin in a war zone. And the Hainan, for all her muscle, was built to look strong, but not to take a hit. On the outside, Hainan looks ready for anything. You have the HHQ-10 short-range missiles up front, 14 in a box, programmed to slap down any incoming jet or cruise missile before it gets close. The HPJ-11 Gatling guns sit at the corners, each one spinning 11 barrels fast enough to shred a sea-skimming missile or a speedboat in seconds. To a casual observer, she is armored in confidence, all teeth and muscle, just waiting for the order to charge a hostile beach. But here is the irony. All those weapons are meant for threats coming from the horizon, not from the belly of the ship. CIWS and SAMs cannot do a thing when the enemy is a spark in the well deck, or a fire that starts in a bundle of cable insulation. You can bolt every radar and missile launcher to the deck, but if you cannot stop a fire from running wild inside, you are just arming an E-jig shell with hammers. A real warship is more than a floating gun rack. It is a fortress built to fight for its own life. The US Navy lives in zebra during combat, every hatch dogged down, every compartment sealed, every sailor trained to grab a hose before a gun. That is how you keep a ship alive when things go wrong. But the Hainan, for all her external firepower, had never faced a real test of what happens when fire starts on the inside. No missile battery in the world will save you if your own steel turns into a chimney. As any old salt will tell you, it is not the weapons that make a warship, it is the ability to survive the first punch. It starts with a wisp, then turns into a monster. One minute, the Hainan's well deck is just another dark, echoing steel box, big enough to swallow a tank, lined with fresh cable runs and half-finished bulkheads. The next, smoke is boiling up from the stern, thick as tar, pouring out wherever it finds daylight. Not from a missile hit, not from enemy action, but from a single spark, maybe a welder's torch, maybe a grinder, landing in the wrong pile of packing or insulation. In a real warship, you would slam the hatches, seal the decks, and choke the fire before it could breathe. But Hainan, still in fitting out, is wide open. Every elevator shaft, every stairwell, every open hatch becomes an airway. The well deck acts like a giant intake, sucking oxygen in and feeding the fire. The elevator trunks, designed to lift helicopters, now work like smokestacks, channeling the black plume straight up through the hangar and out the flight deck. From the dock, the smoke looks wrong. Too much, too fast, coming from everywhere at once. Even a seasoned Master Chief would stop and stare. You expect a little haze during hot work, but not a column that towers over the shipyard cranes and stains the sky. It is not just a fire, it is a lesson in what happens when a ship built for show meets the oldest enemy at sea. You can bolt on all the HHQ-10s and Gatling guns you want, but if you leave your ship open, fire will find every shortcut you give it. That is not damage control. That is rolling the dice with 40,000 tons of steel and hope. April 11th, 2020, Hudong Zhonghua Shipyard. Word gets out before the smoke even clears. Cell phone footage, grainy, shaky, shot from behind the yard fence, starts bouncing around Chinese social media. You have a warship that is supposed to be the pride of the fleet, and now it is all over the internet, tagged with the time and the place. Shanghai, Type 075, thick smoke pouring from the stern. The posts do not last. By the afternoon, clips are vanishing from Weibo and Douyin, scrubbed by censors who do not want the world to see China's invasion ship looking like a burnt-out Hulk. But the internet has a long memory, and before the blackout, the videos are already archived by foreign defense blogs and naval analysts. This is not rumor or propaganda, it is proof. You can freeze frame the hull number, match the skyline, and see the superstructure that only the Hainan carried at that stage of fitting out. The date stamp lines up with the shipyard's own construction logs. Even after the official silence, the evidence is out there, enough for any analyst to confirm the incident happened, right down to the hour. A defense analyst puts it bluntly: no missile or torpedo did this. That is what Haste looks like in steel and smoke. There is no hiding from a viral fire. The plan can paint over the damage, but they cannot repaint the internet. And for every video that gets deleted, there is a copy sitting in an archive, waiting to be pulled up by anyone who wants to see what happens when a navy builds for the parade ground, not the battlefield. 6 months. That's all the time they gave themselves to get 40,000 tons of steel from keel to launch. In the world of warship building, that's not just fast, it's reckless. The Hainan was not the only one. Her sister ship slid down the ways barely half a year later. You do not hit numbers like that by being careful. You hit them by pushing every shift, skipping every step that is not absolutely mandatory, and trusting that nothing goes wrong before the cameras show up for the launch ceremony. The pressure came straight from the top. Beijing wanted a show of strength, and the shipyard delivered, on paper. Permits, inspections, fire watches. Those slow you down. What matters is having a hull in the water before the next party deadline. At Hudong Zhonghua, the schedule was gospel, and the gospel said, build faster. If you can weld it today, do not wait for tomorrow. If you can run the cabling before the bulkheads are sealed, do it. If the safety officer is off shift, hope for the best and keep the grinders running. A senior engineer speaking off the record said they were building ships for the parade, not for the fight, and that every day lost is a mark against them. That is not just pride talking. In a system where promotions depend on hitting targets, nobody wants to be the reason a ship misses its launch date. Corners get cut, fire watches are stretched thin. Temporary materials, cardboard, plastic wrap, packing foam pile up in spaces that should be kept clear. The paperwork that says no hot work without a permit gathers dust in an office while sparks rain down in the well deck. The result is a warship that looks ready for war but is wide open to disaster. 6 months from keel to launch means systems are not finished, compartments are not sealed, and every open hatch is an invitation for trouble. On the Hainan, that trouble arrived in the form of a spark, one that found a shortcut through a ship built for speed, not for survival. Fire on a warship doesn't start as a monster, it starts as a mistake. On Hainan, it was a spark from a welder's torch, probably dropped into a pile of packing foam or cable insulation left scattered in the well deck. That's hot work, you cut steel, you make sparks. But in a rush job, nobody's standing watch with a hose and a permit. The fire gets 30 seconds of freedom, and that's all it needs. Inside a ship built for speed, not for survival, every shortcut is a fire's best friend. The well deck is a steel canyon, open from stern gate to hangar bulkhead, meant to swallow hovercraft and tanks. During fitting out, nothing is sealed. Hatches stand open, elevator trunks yawning from the well deck all the way to the flight deck. No fire boundaries, no Circle William, just open air from the waterline to the roof. The shipyard wants airflow for the workers, but what they're really doing is building a wind tunnel for disaster. When the spark hit, oxygen poured in through every opening. Flames found the insulation, the plastic wrap, the temporary cabling, materials that should have been cleared before any hot work. Instead, they burned like a fuse. The fire raced up the elevator trunks, sucked along by the draft, and turned the ship's core into a chimney. Smoke didn't just fill the well deck, it shot up through the hangar, out the elevator shafts, and spilled onto the flight deck. In a warship built to fight, you'd slam every hatch and dog every door, setting Zebra to choke the fire and starve it of air. On Hainan, the only thing sealed was the fate of the ship's reputation. That's the difference between a parade ship and a fighting ship. The US Navy drills for this, every sailor knows the call. Set Zebra, kill the airflow, box the fire in. On Hainan, nobody set anything. The ship lived in open, and fire took the shortest path from spark to sky. You can arm a ship with every missile and gun in the catalog, but if you leave the doors open, you're just building eggshells armed with hammers. On a real warship, survival is not about how many missiles you bolt to the deck. It is about how you fight the enemy that sneaks up from inside, fire, flooding, smoke. That is why the US Navy drills every sailor, from the greenest recruit to the crustiest chief, to live and breathe material condition Zebra. Set Zebra, and you turn a ship into a honeycomb of sealed steel boxes. Every hatch, every watertight door, every vent, dogged down tight. You cut off the air, choke the fire, and keep the damage trapped where it starts. That is not just a checklist. That is the difference between a ship that limps home and one that never makes it back. When the general quarters alarm sounds, it is not the guns that save you. It is the hands spinning those big red hand wheels, the boots running the dog lines, the eyes checking every seal. You do not wait for orders. You move. You close the loop. In Zebra, you can flood a compartment and the ship still floats. You can lose a space to fire and the rest of the ship keeps fighting. That is the doctrine. The ship fights for its own life, one compartment at a time. Firefighting is not just a job for the damage control teams. On a US amphibious ship, every sailor is a firefighter. You train with the hoses, you know where the AFFF manifolds are, you can hit the halon button in the hangar without thinking. AFFF aqueous film-forming foam smothers fuel fires in seconds. Halon gas chokes out the oxygen before flames can even get a foothold. You do not leave those systems half-installed, not even at the dock. You do not run hot work without a fire watch standing by, hose charged, and eyes open. That is the benchmark. The Wasp class lives in Zebra when things get ugly. Every opening sealed, every path for fire blocked. That is what keeps a 40,000-ton ship from turning into a floating tomb. If you cannot set Zebra, you are not ready for war, you are just waiting for disaster. By the next morning, the stern was gleaming white again. Not a trace of the blackened steel, not a hint of the scorched paint that had streaked down from the hangar deck. Just a fresh coat, slapped on fast, cosmetic surgery for a ship that had coughed up smoke all over the internet. In the rush to erase the evidence, nobody paused to ask what heat does to insulation or wiring hidden behind those panels. The Hainan got a facelift, but you cannot paint over fatigue in the steel or the smell of burnt cables. That is not a repair. It is a cover-up, the kind you do when the next hull is sliding down the ways and the party needs a parade, not a post-mortem. Some people like to throw the Bonhomme Richard fire back in your face. They will say, look at the Americans, 5 days of flames in San Diego, a ship lost to a single spark. But here is the difference. Bonhomme Richard was 2 decades old, gutted for upgrades, with her fire systems powered down and half the crew ashore. That was a maintenance disaster, not a construction shortcut. On Hainan, the fire struck a brand new hull, still half finished, with every opening wide and every shortcut exposed. The United States Navy lost a ship because sailors forgot their own rules. The People's Liberation Army Navy nearly lost theirs because they never set the rules in the first place. A real warship is not judged by how fast you can slap on a coat of paint. It is judged by what is left after the smoke clears and the alarms go silent. The Hainan's scars vanished in a day, but the lesson lingers. If you build for speed, you build for failure. You can arm an eggshell with every hammer in the catalog, but it is still an eggshell. In my book, that is not a fleet ready for war. It is a fleet ready for the next cover-up. Today, China's fleet looks fierce on paper, but a ship that can't set zebra at the dock is a coffin in a war zone. Steel and missiles mean nothing if fire discipline is an afterthought. The real test isn't how fast you build, but whether you survive your own sparks. Right now, eggshells armed with hammers still rule the pier. Let me know your take in the comments below.